He thought he was unraveling the universe's deepest secrets, but instead, he unlocked a loop that threatened to tear reality apart. Now, with an alien warrior at his side, Kael Grayson must face a choice: unravel the mystery or risk everything forever. If you're hooked, don't miss what happens next. Hit that subscribe button and join us for the rest of this cosmic adventure. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Trust me. The research station Ecliptica floated like a lone ember in the infinite night, its sleek, silver hull catching faint glimmers from the black hole's event horizon. Beyond the station's reinforced viewports, the singularity churned, a silent colossus of gravity and mystery, its edges streaked with warped light that danced like ghostly flames. Inside the cavernous laboratory, Kael Grayson stood amidst a symphony of machinery, his silhouette framed by the golden glow of the Eon Matrix. His brown hair, a chaotic tangle from days without a comb, fell into his hazel eyes as he adjusted a crystalline conduit with trembling, caffeine-fueled precision. The air buzzed with the device's low, resonant hum, a sound that vibrated through the steel floor and into his bones. Kael hadn't slept in 3 days. A cold cup of coffee sat abandoned on the cluttered workbench, its surface rippling faintly with each pulse of the Eon Matrix. Beside it lay a crumpled sketch, an old drawing of starry sky he'd made as a boy in the slums of Earth, the paper yellowed and torn at the edges. That dream of touching the stars had driven him here, to this edge of the known universe. "Come on, you beautiful beast," he muttered, voice hoarse from too much silence and too little water. "Give me something to show the bastards back home. Mom always said I'd either change the world or blow it up. Let's aim for the first one." His lips quirked into a tired grin as he tapped a holographic interface, coaxing the device's energy readings higher. The Eon Matrix was his masterpiece, a lattice of circuits and crystal designed to siphon power from the black hole's abyss. Its golden light pulsed like a heartbeat, casting shifting shadows across the lab's walls, where scribbled equations overlapped with coffee stains. Kael's fingers danced over the controls, fine-tuning the flow of energy with a mix of instinct and desperation. He could feel it. The breakthrough was close, a whisper of infinity just beyond his grasp. "Vera," he called, glancing at the ceiling as if the AI could see his exhaustion. "Run simulation Zeta 3. Let's see if this thing can hold together." The station's AI responded in its smooth, melodic tone. "Simulation sequence Zeta 3 initiated, Dr. Grayson. Energy cohesion at 92% and rising. Your vitals indicate significant fatigue. May I recommend a rest cycle?" Kael snorted, brushing a hand through his hair and leaving it sticking up at odd angles. "Rest is for people who don't have a universe to rewrite. Vera, keep the numbers coming." His eyes gleamed with a manic spark as he watched the hollow display climb. 93%, 94%. This wasn't just science. It was defiance against every doubter who'd called him a dreamer with dirty hands. A faint tremor rippled through the lab, rattling a stack of data pads on a nearby shelf. Kael's hand froze mid-motion, the hollow display flickering briefly. "Vera, what the hell was that?" The AI's voice returned, clipped with a rare edge of uncertainty. "Unidentified energy signature detected in Sector 12. Parameters do not align with known technology. Initiating security protocols now." Kael's pulse quickened as he spun to the console, fingers flying across the controls to pull up external feeds. The screens flared to life, showing the black hole's swirling maw, until a shadow sliced through the chaos, sharp and deliberate. She emerged like a phantom woven from starlight and shadow, stepping through a breach in the station's outer hull with a grace that made Kael's breath catch. Mara was a vision of alien beauty and menace. Her skin shimmered a deep violet, like twilight distilled into flesh, catching the lab's emergency lights in a way that made it ripple like liquid amethyst. Long, pointed ears rose elegantly from a cascade of silver hair that spilled down her back, glinting like molten metal under the crimson glow. She wore a sleek suit of armor, blue and white interwoven in a pattern that hugged her lithe frame, its surface etched with glowing runes that pulsed faintly, as if alive. The armor shifted with her movements, accentuating the curve of her hips and the strength in her shoulders, a predator's form clad in artistry. Her amber eyes, slit with vertical pupils, locked onto Kael with an intensity that pinned him in place. In her right hand, she gripped a spiraling blade of energy, its tip humming with a high-pitched whine that set his nerves alight. "Kael Grayson," she said, her voice a harmonic blend of silk and steel, resonating with an otherworldly timbre that sent a shiver racing down his spine. "I am Mara, blade of the Aethyr Dominion. Your reckless tampering with the abyss ends here." She took a step forward, the runes on her armor flaring brighter, casting fleeting patterns across the lab's steel walls. Kael stumbled back, his hip banging against the workbench and sending the old sketch fluttering to the floor. "Whoa, hold it right there," he stammered, hands raised as if they could ward her off. "I don't even know what an ether is. This," he gestured wildly at the Eon Matrix, "this is just research. Energy, not some doomsday device." His mind raced, scrambling for a way out. He edged toward the console, fingers brushing the controls as he tried to stall. Mara tilted her head, her silver hair shifting like a curtain of liquid light, and her lips curved into a faint, mirthless smile that revealed teeth sharp as broken glass. "Your kind always hides behind words," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "The Dominion does not judge intent, only consequences." She lunged, her blade cutting through the air with a scream of unleashed power. Kael dove to the side, crashing into a stack of spare parts that clattered across the floor in a chaotic symphony of metal. The weapon missed him by a hair's breadth, its energy slicing into the Eon Matrix with a sound like a thunderclap. The impact unleashed a torrent of golden light, a spiraling wave that erupted from the device in a blinding corona. Sparks showered the lab, igniting a stack of papers that flared briefly before crumbling to ash. The station groaned as the black hole's influence bled through the breach, a low rumble that shook the walls and sent a tremor up Kael's spine. He felt it, a searing vibration that tore through him, as if every atom in his body were unraveling and stitching itself back together. Through the chaos, he caught a glimpse of Mara, her violet skin aglow in the maelstrom, her expression twisting from cold triumph to wide-eyed shock. Her silver hair whipped wildly, a shimmering storm around her face, and her hand reached out, fingers trembling as they grazed the air just inches from his. "What have you?" she began, but her words drowned in the roar of energy. The world shattered. Space folded inward like a collapsing star, the lab's walls bending and twisting as colors bled into a void of nothingness. Kael's vision blurred, his chest tightening as reality itself seemed to scream. Then, with a jolt that snapped his head back, he gasped awake, sprawled across the cold lab floor. The Eon Matrix hummed steadily before him, its golden light calm and unbroken, as if nothing had happened. The console blinked with familiar readings: 93% cohesion. Zeta, 3 simulation paused. Vera's voice cut through the haze, serene as ever. "Good morning, Dr. Grayson. It is 0600 hours. Shall I prepare your coffee?" Kael blinked, disoriented, his hand trembling as he pushed himself up. The sketch of the stars lay crumpled beside him, untouched by fire. He reached for the edge of the workbench, steadying himself as his gaze darted to the hollow screen. The date stared back at him. Yesterday. His breath hitched, and unbidden, an image flashed through his mind. Violet skin shimmering like twilight, amber eyes sharp as a blade, and a voice that echoed in his skull like a song he couldn't unhear. He pressed a hand to his chest, feeling his heart hammer against his ribs. "Vera," he rasped, voice barely a whisper, run a full scan of the station. "Something's coming." Kael Grayson leaned against the secondary console, the handheld scanner still clutched in his grip. Its faint beeping had faded into a steady hum, confirming the residual energy ripple he'd detected near the Eon Matrix. The lab buzzed with quiet tension, its overhead lights casting a sterile sheen across the curved walls. He exhaled sharply, his breath fogging briefly in the cool air, and set the scanner down beside a half-finished protein bar he'd abandoned earlier. The golden glow of the Eon Matrix pulsed in the corner of his vision, steady and mocking, as if it knew something he didn't. "Vera," he said, his voice low but firm, cross-reference that energy signature with every database we've got. Human, salvaged, anything. "I need a lead." The AI's response came with its usual crisp efficiency. "Processing request, Dr. Grayson. Preliminary analysis suggests an extra-dimensional origin. Full results in approximately 7 minutes." Kael nodded, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm on the console's edge. His hazel eyes flicked to the hollow screen, where the date still glared back at him. Yesterday. The realization had settled into his bones like a cold ache. He was trapped, reliving the same day, and that violet-skinned intruder was part of it. He crossed the lab, boots scuffing against the rubberized floor, and knelt beside a low storage unit. Popping it open, he rummaged through a jumble of tools until he found a portable disruptor, a clunky prototype he'd built years ago, its casing scratched and dented from test runs. "Not much, but it'll do," he muttered, tucking it into the waistband of his jumpsuit. If she came back, and he was damn sure she would, he'd be ready this time. The memory of her attack replayed in his mind. The spiraling blade, the explosion, the way her amber eyes had widened just before everything reset. "Who are you?" "Mara," he whispered, the name tasting foreign yet familiar on his tongue. A soft chime from Vera interrupted his thoughts. "Analysis complete. Energy signature matches known technology, but residual patterns align with theoretical temporal distortions. Recommend further investigation." Kael straightened, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "Temporal distortions, huh? That's scientist speak for you're screwed, Kael." He turned to the Eon Matrix, running a hand along its smooth casing. The device felt warm under his touch, almost alive, and a flicker of unease coiled in his gut. "You did this, didn't you? Locked us in some kind of loop." Before he could dwell on it, the air near the lab's ventilation shaft rippled, a subtle distortion, like water bending under a stone's throw. Kael's hand snapped to the disruptor, his pulse kicking up a notch. The shimmer solidified, and she emerged, stepping onto the floor with the grace of a predator stalking prey. Mara's violet skin caught the lab's light, shimmering with an iridescent sheen that made her seem both solid and ethereal. Her long, pointed ears rose sharply from a cascade of silver hair, the strands swaying as if stirred by an unseen breeze. The blue and white armor clung to her frame, its glowing runes tracing delicate arcs across her chest and arms, pulsing faintly like distant stars. Her amber eyes locked onto him, sharp and unyielding, and Kael felt the air thicken with her presence. She held her spiraling blade loosely, its energy humming a low, menacing note. "Kael Grayson," she said, her voice a melodic current that seemed to weave through the room. "Your persistence is futile. The Eon Matrix defies the Dominion's will. It must be undone." She advanced, her boots silent against the floor, the runes on her armor flaring with each step. Kael didn't flinch. "Yeah, I remember the speech," he said, his tone dry as he raised the disruptor. "Last time you swung that thing, we both had a front-row seat to chaos. Look around, Mara, this lab's untouched. You hit the Eon Matrix, and now we're stuck repeating this day. Ring any bells?" Mara paused, her blade hovering mid-air, its hum softening slightly. A shadow of doubt flickered across her face, her long ears twitching as she processed his words. She glanced at the Eon Matrix, its golden light reflecting in her pupils like molten fire. "A repetition," she said, her voice quieter now, tinged with curiosity. She lowered the blade an inch, studying him with a scrutiny that made his skin prickle. I sensed an echo, a moment torn and rewoven. "But my orders remain. Your work threatens all." Kael seized the opening, stepping forward with calculated calm. "Then why are you here again?" Same time, same place. I felt it too, that echo. Whatever happened, it's tied to that machine, and it's got us both. He tapped a command into the console beside him. A shimmering shield of energy flared up between them, its surface rippling like liquid glass. Mara's eyes narrowed, but she didn't strike. Instead, she tilted her head, her silver hair spilling over one shoulder. "You claim a cycle traps us," she said, her tone edged with skepticism. "Prove it, human." Kael smirked, lowering the disruptor slightly. "Gladly. You breached Sector 12 last time. Outer hull, right near the auxiliary vents. Hit the Eon Matrix at exactly 0618 hours. Sound familiar?" Her ears stiffened, a subtle flinch betraying her composure. "How could you?" she began, then stopped, her gaze darting to the ventilation shaft she'd emerged from. "The Dominion scans detected no such anomaly," she murmured, almost to herself. Kael pressed his advantage. "Because it's not their tech, it's mine, gone haywire. We're looping, Mara. You me this lab, and I bet my last protein bar you're starting to remember it too." Mara's grip on her blade tightened, the runes on her armor pulsing faster, but she didn't move. "If you speak truth," she said slowly, "then your machine is a greater danger than I was told. Destroying it may be our only release." Kael shook his head, his voice firm. "Or it obliterates us, permanently this time. I'm not rolling those dice without a plan. You want out? Help me understand what's happening. Two heads are better than one, even if one's swinging a sword at me." The lab fell silent, the Eon Matrix's hum a steady heartbeat in the background. Mara's amber eyes bore into him, searching for deception. Then, with a fluid motion, she retracted her blade, its energy dissipating into a faint shimmer that danced across her violet skin. "Very well, Kael Grayson," she said, her voice a low, resonant promise. "I will hear you out for now, but do not mistake this for trust." Kael nodded, a spark of relief flickering in his chest. The loop had just gotten a little less lonely. Kael Grayson stood in the shadow of the Eon Matrix, its golden light washing over the lab's curved walls in gentle waves. The air carried a faint hum, punctuated by the soft clicks of cooling machinery, and a thin layer of condensation glistened on the floor near a vent, a remnant of the station's overworked climate system. Mara lingered a few paces away, her violet silhouette framed against a flickering hollow display, her silver hair swaying as she shifted her weight. The runes on her blue and white armor pulsed faintly, casting fleeting patterns across her arms, and her amber eyes watched him with the intensity of a hawk sizing up its perch. "Truce, then," Kael said, his voice light but deliberate as he wiped his hands on his jumpsuit. He stepped toward the Eon Matrix, its casing still warm from their earlier scans. "You're not swinging that blade, so let's use those hands for something useful. Take a look at this mess with me. Call it a learning opportunity instead of a demolition job." Mara's long ears tilted forward, a subtle sign of interest, though her expression remained guarded. She approached slowly, her boots leaving faint echoes on the metal floor, and stopped just close enough for him to catch the sharp, electric scent that clung to her, like ozone after a lightning strike. She peered at the Eon Matrix, her gaze tracing its crystalline conduits. "Your design is flawed," she said, her melodic voice cutting through the hum. "The energy flow loops too tightly, unstable, prone to rupture." Kael raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms. "Flawed, huh? Coming from someone who slashed it last time, that's bold." He tapped a panel on the device, pulling up a diagnostic screen that flared to life, a tangle of red and gold lines spiking erratically. "But you're not wrong. See this? It's overloading. If we don't fix it, this loop's going to end with a bang again." Mara leaned closer, her silver hair brushing the edge of the screen, and pointed to a jagged peak. "Here," she said, her tone sharp with authority. "Your conduits lack a dampener. Aethyr systems use harmonic filters to balance such flows." Kael nodded, digging into a nearby crate until he found a small, disc-shaped component, its surface etched with tiny grooves, faintly glowing from past use. "Like this?" he asked, holding it up. Built it to tune the frequencies, but I never installed it. Thought it'd slow the output. Mara took the disc, her violet fingers brushing his as she turned it over, inspecting it with a craftsman's eye. Primitive, she muttered, but her ears twitched with approval. She slotted the disc into a port on the Eon Matrix, her movements precise, and adjusted its settings with a deft twist. The red lines on the screen softened, the spikes flattening into smoother curves. A faint tremor ran through the lab, the lights flickering briefly, but no explosion followed, just a low, steady hum. Kael let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Well, damn," he said, grinning. "Guess you're not just a sword slinger after all." Mara stepped back, her runes settling into a calm glow, and fixed him with a steady stare. "It holds for now," she said, "but do not mistake this for a victory." Kael chuckled, leaning against the workbench, its surface cluttered with spare connectors and a cracked datapad. "Noted. Still, we make a half-decent team when you're not trying to skewer me." He paused, then tilted his head, his hazel eyes softening. "You know, back on Earth, I used to climb the roof of our shack at night. Rusted old thing, leaked like hell. I'd lie there, staring at the stars, dreaming I'd touch them someday. What about you? What did you dream of before you picked up that blade?" Mara's gaze drifted, her amber eyes clouding with something distant. "I dreamed of light," she said quietly, her voice a whisper against the lab's hum. "Not the kind that blinds or burns, but living light. I wove it into shapes, stories that danced on the walls of my clan's halls. Now, the only light I know is the flicker of this sword." She glanced at the sheathed weapon on her back, its energy dormant but ever-present. Kael watched her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Sounds beautiful," he said. "If we get out of this loop, I'm holding you to a deal. Paint me one of those stories. No swords, no blood, just stars." Her ears stiffened, and she turned to him, her expression caught between surprise and something softer. "You are strange, Kael Grayson," she said, her voice low and resonant. "No one has asked me for anything but battle in longer than I can recall." She looked away, her silver hair veiling her face, but the faintest tremor in her runes betrayed a crack in her armor, a flicker of vulnerability beneath the warrior's shell. Kael's grin widened, though his tone stayed gentle. "Guess I'm not most people. Stick around. I might surprise you yet." The lab settled into a fragile stillness, the Eon Matrix humming its steady tune. Kael's humor had chipped at her defenses, a small but deliberate breach, while Mara's admission hung between them, a thread of her past she hadn't meant to unravel. She straightened, her posture firming as if to reclaim her resolve, but her eyes lingered on him a moment longer, searching. "This changes nothing," she said, though the words lacked their earlier bite. "We are bound by need, not choice." Kael nodded, his hands slipping into his pockets. "For now, that's enough. Let's keep this thing from blowing us up, then we'll see what's next." The lab aboard Ecliptica thrummed with a restless energy, its walls bathed in the soft, amber glow of auxiliary lights that flickered faintly with each pulse of the Eon Matrix. Kael Grayson knelt beside the device, a tangle of wires spilling from an open panel like the guts of some mechanical beast. His jumpsuit was smudged with streaks of coolant, and a bead of sweat traced a slow path down his temple as he wrestled with a stubborn connector. The air carried a faint, metallic bite, undercut by the hum of ventilation fans working overtime to keep the heat at bay. Mara stood a few feet away, her violet silhouette sharp against the lab's muted tones, her silver hair catching the light like a halo of molten starlight. "Pass me that flux calibrator," Kael said, his voice muffled as he leaned deeper into the Eon Matrix's innards. He pointed to a slender tool on the workbench, its handle wrapped in worn tape. Mara's long ears twitched, and she stepped forward, her blue and white armor shifting subtly with her movements. The runes etched into its surface glowed a steady, muted blue, a quiet contrast to the tension in her posture. She picked up the calibrator, her violet fingers brushing its edge, and handed it to him. As he took it, their hands grazed, a fleeting contact that sent a jolt through him, sharp and electric like static leaping between circuits. "Thanks," he muttered, his hazel eyes flicking up to meet hers. Mara didn't pull away immediately, her amber gaze lingering on him, and the air between them thickened, charged with an unspoken current. Her runes pulsed brighter for a heartbeat, a ripple of light that danced across her chest, and Kael felt his breath catch. It was as if her presence tugged at something primal in him, a pull he couldn't name but couldn't ignore. He cleared his throat, forcing his focus back to the wires. "This thing's fighting me every step," he said, his tone lighter than he felt. "But we're close, real close." Mara crouched beside him, her silver hair spilling over her shoulder as she studied the Eon Matrix. "Your machine resists stability," she said, her melodic voice soft but precise. "Yet it responds to us, together." She reached past him, her arm brushing his, and adjusted a crystalline node with a deft twist. The device's hum deepened, a low vibration that rippled through the floor, and Kael noticed the energy readings on a nearby hollow screen, steadying further. "See," she added, her lips curving faintly. "Our proximity, it binds the chaos." Kael glanced at her, his hand stilling on the calibrator. Her closeness was a quiet storm, her electric scent sharper now, her warmth seeping through the thin space between them. "Yeah," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "I've been tracking that. Every time we're near, the loop slows, like it's feeding off us." He shifted slightly, his knee brushing hers, and the contact sent a shiver up his spine, a heat that coiled low and tight. Mara's ears tilted, her runes flaring again, and for a moment, her gaze darkened, amber eyes glinting like embers in a dying fire, a look that felt like a dare, a question, a pull he couldn't resist. "Feeding off us," she echoed, her tone low and resonant, vibrating through him like a plucked string. She leaned closer, her hand resting on the Eon Matrix's casing, inches from his, and the lab seemed to shrink, the world narrowing to the space they shared. "Aethyr physiology resonates with such energies," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "But you amplify it, Kael. I feel it here." Her free hand hovered over her chest, where the runes glowed brightest, and the gesture was a spark to dry tinder, igniting something raw in him. He swallowed hard, his fingers tightening on the calibrator until his knuckles whitened. "Guess we're more tangled up than I thought," he said, a faint grin tugging at his lips to mask the heat rising in his chest. "You're saying I'm the secret sauce in this mess?" Mara's ears twitched, and she tilted her head, her silver hair brushing his arm, a touch so light it was maddening. "Secret sauce," she repeated, the phrase foreign on her tongue, but her lips curved again, a rare, fleeting smile. "Perhaps, or a catalyst I did not expect." The moment hung, fragile and electric, until a sharp beep from the hollow screen snapped them back. Kael turned to it, his pulse still racing, and frowned at the new data streaming across the display. "Hold up," he said, his voice steadying as he traced a pattern with his finger. "This isn't just us stabilizing it. There's something else. A signature buried in the energy waves." Mara straightened, her armor's runes dimming as she shifted into focus. She tapped her wrist, summoning a small, shimmering projection of ether glyphs that floated between them, sharp and intricate. "I know this," she said, her tone sharpening with realization. "It is the mark of the Eon Warden, an ancient construct forged by Aethyr and human minds long ago, lost a war. It guards against reckless power." Kael's eyes widened, and he leaned into the projection, the glyphs casting faint shadows across his face. "You're telling me some old AI's behind this loop? Trapping us to what? Test us." Mara nodded, her silver hair swaying as she traced a glyph with her fingertip. "To prove our kinds can coexist, or to bury us if we fail. It watches even now." Kael sat back on his heels, running a hand through his hair as the weight of it sank in. "Great," he muttered, "a cosmic babysitter with a grudge. But if it's watching, we can talk to it. Use this." He gestured to the Eon Matrix, its hum now a steady pulse that seemed to echo their shared rhythm. Mara's gaze softened, her amber eyes meeting his with a new intensity. "Together," she said, her voice firm yet laced with something deeper. "Our resonance, it may be the key." He nodded, his hand brushing hers again as he reached for the screen. A deliberate touch this time, testing the spark that flared between them. Her runes pulsed, a silent answer, and the lab's hum seemed to fade, leaving only the beat of their connection. "Together," he agreed, his grin returning, softer now. "Let's give this warden something to think about." Mara's lips parted, a breath escaping her, and for the first time, her guard slipped, a crack wide enough to let him in. The lab aboard Ecliptica trembled faintly, its steel walls groaning under the strain of the Eon Matrix's escalating hum. Kael Grayson stood at its core, his hand steady on a newly rigged control panel. A patchwork of salvage circuits and Aethyr glyphs Mara had etched into its surface with a precision that left him awestruck. The air shimmered with heat, a haze rising from the device's glowing conduits, and a faint crackle of static danced across the room, sparking where it met the floor's polished seams. Mara knelt beside him, her violet skin glistening with a sheen of perspiration, her silver hair clinging to her neck in damp strands that caught the lab's shifting light like threads of liquid starfire. "We've got one shot," Kael said, his voice taut as he adjusted a dial, its notched edge biting into his fingertips. His hazel eyes flicked to the hollow screen hovering above them, where energy waves pulsed in a frantic rhythm, teetering on the edge of collapse. Mara's amber gaze met his, her long ears tilting forward, and the runes on her blue and white armor flared with a restless intensity, casting jagged shadows across her face. "The Eon Warden waits," she said, her melodic tone edged with urgency. "Its signature grows stronger. It demands an answer." She tapped her wrist, and a projection flared to life between them. A single line of glyphs, stark and glowing, translated into stark human text: harmony or dissolution. "Choose." Kael's breath hitched, his hand pausing mid-motion. "Harmony or dissolution," he repeated, the words heavy on his tongue. "Cut the connection and go back to being strangers, or bind ourselves forever quantum style. That's the deal, huh?" Mara nodded, her silver hair brushing his arm as she leaned closer, her warmth a quiet pulse against his side. "To sever it, we return to our worlds. Me to the Dominion's judgment, you to your stars. To harmonize," her voice softened, her runes pulsing like a heartbeat. "We become one, entwined beyond flesh, beyond time." The air thickened, a current sparking between them as their eyes locked. Kael felt it, a pull, raw and undeniable, like gravity drawing him into her orbit. His hand shifted, brushing hers where it rested on the panel, and the contact was a flare of heat, a thread of lightning that tightened something deep in his chest. Her runes blazed, a cascade of light that seemed to hum in sync with his racing pulse, and her lips parted, a breath escaping that felt like a whisper against his skin. "I choose us," he said, his voice low and rough, a confession wrapped in resolve. "What we've got, it's worth the risk." Mara's ears twitched, her amber eyes darkening with a fire that mirrored his own. "Then so do I," she said, her tone a vow as she pressed her hand over his, her violet fingers interlocking with his. The lab seemed to fade, the hum of the Eon Matrix swelling into a roar, and in that moment, their choice ignited, a spark that demanded release. Kael pulled her closer, his free hand sliding to her waist, grazing the curve where her armor met bare skin. The touch was a collision, a surge of energy that made her gasp, her runes flaring like a supernova as their bodies pressed together. The world dissolved into a vortex of light and sound, a dance of atoms, a fusion of wills, his warmth melding with her electric grace in a silent, cosmic embrace that transcended words, leaving only the echo of their shared breath as reality unraveled. The Eon Matrix erupted, a blinding wave of white washing over them, its conduits shattering into a cascade of glittering dust. When the light faded, Kael blinked against a new stillness, his chest heaving as he found himself sprawled on a smooth, obsidian floor. The lab was gone, replaced by a vast chamber of curved, translucent walls that shimmered with veins of silver and gold. An ancient ship, its air thick with the scent of forgotten alloys and distant stars. Mara lay beside him, her silver hair fanned across the floor, her violet skin aglow in the chamber's soft light. Her runes pulsed faintly, a steady rhythm that matched the beat he felt in his own chest, a thread binding them, unbreakable and alive. "We're out," Kael said, his voice hoarse as he pushed himself up, his hand finding hers instinctively. Mara rose with him, her amber eyes wide as she took in the ship's expanse, a relic of the Aether-Human alliance, its architecture a testament to a unity long lost. "The Eon Warden brought us here," she said, her tone awed as she traced a glyph on the wall, its surface warm under her touch. "A sanctuary or a judgment?" Kael grinned, squeezing her hand. "Let's make it a fresh start." He turned to a crystalline console at the chamber's center, its surface flickering with faint signals, echoes of the Warden's presence. "Hey, Warden," he called, his voice ringing clear in the stillness. "You've seen us fight, fix, and, well, figure each other out. How about you do something useful with that?" He tapped the console, pulling up a rudimentary interface, and began encoding a message, a plea woven from their story, a call for peace between humanity and the Aethyr Dominion. "Send this out," he said, his tone firm. "To Earth, to your people. Show them what we've done, what we are. No war, no walls, just this." Mara stepped beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder, her runes glowing with a quiet pride. "A signal born of US," she said, her voice resonant as she added her own glyphs to the code, her fingers dancing across the console with a grace that made his heart skip. Let it prove the Warden's test was not in vain. The console flared, a pulse of light rippling outward, and Kael felt a surge of hope, a human spark, amplified by her strength, reaching across the void to rewrite their fates. The chamber hummed, the Warden's presence a silent witness as the signal launched, a beacon cutting through the dark. Kael turned to Mara, his grin softening into something tender. "Guess we're stuck with each other now," he said, his hand brushing her cheek, tracing the edge of her runes. She leaned into his touch, her amber eyes steady and warm. "A fate I accept," she replied, her voice a melody that anchored him. Together, they stood, a bridge forged in defiance and desire, ready to face whatever lay beyond. The ancient ship hummed beneath Kael Grayson's boots, its translucent walls pulsing with a soft, silvery light that bathed the chamber in an otherworldly glow. Beyond the curved viewports, a binary star system burned, a pair of suns locked in a slow, eternal waltz, their golden and crimson rays weaving a tapestry across the void. Kael stood at the edge of the observation deck, his jumpsuit still smudged with coolant from the Eon Matrix's final moments, his hazel eyes reflecting the stellar dance. Beside him, Mara rested her hands on the railing, her violet skin shimmering faintly in the starlight, her silver hair cascading over her shoulders like a river of molten metal catching fire. The air carried a faint, metallic tang, laced with the crisp scent of recycled oxygen, a reminder of the ship's age, its systems whirring quietly after centuries of silence. The Eon Warden's signal had gone out hours ago, a ripple of hope launched into the cosmos, and now they waited, bound by the quantum thread that still thrummed between them. Kael could feel it, a subtle pull, a resonance that echoed in his chest whenever Mara moved closer, her presence a constant in the chaos they'd left behind. "Think they'll listen?" he asked, his voice low as he glanced at her, a faint grin tugging at his lips. "Earth, your dominion. Any of them?" Mara's long ears tilted, her amber eyes steady as she watched the stars. "The signal carries our truth," she said, her melodic tone resonant with a quiet strength. "The Warden amplified it. Our story, our choice. If they hear, they will decide. Her runes pulsed faintly along her armor, a rhythmic glow that seemed to dance with the starlight filtering through the viewport. She turned to him, her silver hair brushing the railing, and added, "But truth alone does not sway the stubborn. Your kind and mine, we are steeped in pride." Kael chuckled, leaning against the railing beside her, his shoulder brushing hers in a casual, deliberate touch. "Pride's what got me here, climbing roofs, chasing stars. Guess it's not all bad if it landed me next to you." Her ears twitched, and a rare smile curved her lips, a small, unguarded thing that softened the warrior's edge he'd come to know. "You speak as if fate conspired," she said, her voice teasing yet warm. "Perhaps it did, or perhaps we forced its hand." The runes on her chest flared briefly, a flicker of light that mirrored the heat in his grin. Days had passed since their emergence. Days measured not in loops, but in the slow drift of this relic ship, a monument to a forgotten alliance. The signal's echoes had reached Earth first, sparking a storm of debate among humanity's fractured councils. Reports filtered back through the ship's ancient comms. Scientists hailed Kael as a pioneer, while generals cursed him as a reckless fool who'd handed leverage to an alien foe. The Aethyr Dominion's response came slower, a tense silence broken by whispers of dissent. Some called Mara a traitor, others a visionary who dared to defy their rigid codes. Together, their bond had become a lightning rod, a spark igniting change neither had foreseen. "We're not exactly welcome home yet," Kael said, his tone dry as he pulled a small, cracked data slate from his pocket. Its screen flickered with fragmented transmissions, human voices arguing ethics, ether glyphs pulsing with cautious hope. "But they're talking. That's more than they've done in decades." Mara nodded, her hand resting beside his on the railing, her violet fingers close enough to feel the warmth of his skin. "The Warden's gift," she said, "a bridge built from our defiance. It will stand or fall by what we do next." He turned to her, his grin fading into something earnest. "Then let's make it stand. Earth's got dreamers like me, stubborn, messy, but willing to try. Your Dominion's got strength, discipline we could use." Together, he trailed off, his hand shifting to cover hers, the contact a quiet anchor that sent a shiver through them both. Her runes pulsed brighter, a cascade of light that seemed to weave their shadows into one, and she didn't pull away. "Together," she finished, her voice soft but firm, "we rewrite what was broken. Ether and human, not as foes, but as kin." The ship's comms flared suddenly, a burst of static resolving into a clear signal, a joint transmission from Earth and the Dominion, tentative but real. A human voice spoke first, gruff but measured. "Grayson, you've stirred a hornet's nest. We're sending delegates." Then an ether tone, sharp and resonant. "Mara, blade of the Dominion, your actions demand counsel. We will meet." Kael laughed, a sharp, triumphant sound that echoed off the walls. "Looks like we've got a date," he said, squeezing her hand. "Guess we're ambassadors now, whether they like it or not." Mara's smile widened, her amber eyes glinting with a fire that matched his own. "A hunt of a different kind," she said, her tone laced with a quiet thrill. "Not for blood, but for understanding." She stepped closer, her silver hair brushing his cheek as she leaned in, her warmth a steady pulse against him. "You have given me a new canvas, Kael Grayson, one vast enough for stars." Kael's breath caught, his free hand rising to trace the edge of her armor, where runes met violet skin, a touch that felt like a promise. "And you've given me a reason to keep climbing," he replied, his voice low and steady. "Let's paint something worth seeing." The stars beyond the viewport flared brighter, as if in answer, their light spilling across the deck in a mosaic of gold and crimson. The ship drifted on, a silent witness to their union, its ancient engines stirring to life as if sensing the journey ahead. Below, a planet loomed into view, a neutral world of shimmering crystal plains and violet skies, a place unclaimed by war or pride. Kael and Mara stood together, hands entwined, their quantum bond a living thread that pulsed with every shared heartbeat. The signal had been sent, the bridge begun, but this moment was theirs alone. "We'll build it here," Kael said, his voice soft as he nodded toward the planet. A home, a start, something new. Mara's ears tilted, her gaze following his, as she pressed her shoulder against his, her runes glowing with a steady, unshakable light. "A future forged from us," she agreed, her tone a melody that wove into his words. "Let it shine for all who follow." The stars watched in silence, and in their light, a legacy took root, a testament to two souls who turned a loop of fate into an endless horizon.